and fine-grained scheduling policy. And in this project, we introduced two controllers, a queue job controller and a queue controller. And a queue represents tendency for resource sharing, and queue job represents a collection of objects such as pod and config maps and so on. And queue jobs can be in-queued when no enough resources are available, and it also can be preempted and recessed. And policy-based resource between queue jobs or queues, and will also be included in this project, and such as priority policy or proportion policy. And besides that, we also need to support the resource borderland to reuse the idle resource, and reclaim and preemption for rebalance the resource. Okay, let's see the next page. And this page it just shows the current architecture of Kube Arbitrator. And the Kube Arbitrator will allocate the resources to each queue according to a policy, such as the priority policy or proportion policy. And then a pod under the queue can be scheduled to a host and to run. So, and we also get some requirement for this project. Some from the Kubeflow, and they need the resource sharing between TensorFlow jobs, and some requirement from enterprise users. But I can't list it and due to listed here due to some reason. And we also get some requirement from the working groups, such as scheduling group and big data group. But I don't quite. I get this message from Da, and I don't know the details about the requirement now. And Da and I are still working on the project, and we plan to release a version in Q1 in this year. Okay, here is the workflow of this demo, and in the workflow, the user client is a binary file, and it will create 3 queue jobs and same queue first, and the 3 queue jobs has different priorities, and then we start up the Kube Arbitrator, and it will allocate the resource to the queue job with the highest priority first, and the user client will watch the status of queue jobs, and when a queue job gets this, it will create Kubernetes jobs. After the Kubernetes jobs is finished, the user client will remove the queue job from the under the queue, and then the Kube Arbitrator will allocate resources to the queue with the second highest priority, and the user client will create another Kubernetes jobs and so on. Now let's start the demo. Okay, I start the user client and create 3 queue jobs. Now let's check it. Now there are 3 queue jobs here. Now start up the Cube Arbitrator. And the Cube Arbitrator will allocate the resource to the 3 queue jobs. And now we can see that the second queue job with the higher priority get resources, and the job client submit jobs under the queue job. Now, when the queue job is done, the related queue job will be removed, and the second with the second queue job get resources, and the user client will create a new job and to run them. Okay, the second job is done, and now there is only one queue job left, so it get resources, and the user client submit the third queues, the third jobs, and to run things. Okay, all the jobs are done, and that's all. This is the demo. Okay, any questions about the demo?
Any questions, anyone?
Where can we go? Is there a mailing list or Slack channel to ask more questions or follow up on it?
I'm not aware of one. Jijen, are you? Do you have a Slack channel or mailing list of some sort?
I will. Do you mean how to get the slides from internet?
Sure.
I don't know how to upload the slides to the community, and I will maybe update a link here. Yeah.
If you have more questions, feel free to hit SIG scheduling and poke Klaus or myself or David Oppenheimer, and we can redirect you in the proper locations. There is an incubator repository for this too as well. So if you look underneath the Cube incubator list, there should be Cube Arbitrator.
Okay, yeah, that was, so this is under essentially the SIG scheduling group?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. If there's no more questions, we'll move on to Jace with release updates.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know that the 110 release has kicked off officially, and in the meeting minutes for this meeting, there are links to the schedule. In the meeting minutes as well, I put in some of the key dates that we'll be tracking for. The ones you really want to know about are release day being Wednesday, March 21st. Code freeze is going to be Monday, February 26th. Feature freeze will be January 22nd. And we're looking to have all docs completed and reviewed and ready for merging on Friday, March 9th. So if you didn't get those dates, they're available in the agenda. And also you can look at a bit.ly link, which is Kate's 110-schedule. And that has some more information about the release as well. The team is forming. We are currently lacking 2 roles being filled, the CI signal role and the branch manager. We do just, as of today, have a bug triage lead, who is going to be Josh Burkus, filling the role again. He did that in 1.9. But because of time and constraints, we want to make sure we have a shadow there. So if you're interested in learning from Josh, which would be a great opportunity for somebody who wants to get involved in the release process, please let me know on Slack or however you can do that, because this is a great place for you to give back to the community if possible. Did somebody have a question? Okay. So that's pretty much it. If you want to talk to me about any of the release roles privately, my Slack ID is jdumars. And I'm also jasinger@microsoft.com if you want to reach me. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jace. Graph of the week with Aaron. What do you got for us this week?
Hi, let me share my screen. For what it's worth, on the release 110 note, I will say I filled the CI signal role last time. It is one of 2 roles that is documented. If you want to know how to do this role, I can link you to the page that tells you exactly what you need to do. And I'm happy to walk you through it. Okay, sharing screen. All of the stuff I'm going to show is linked in the meeting notes. So, graph of the week, bot commands. I'm a little biased, SIG testing. We kind of run the bot that implements these commands. A quick walkthrough of some of the common boxes you see in a number of DevStats dashboards. I can show the bot commands aggregated by week, by quarter, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to do a 7-day moving average. I can focus in on specific commands with this dropdown. These red dashed lines here demarcate when we've had releases go out the door. I can hide them if they're distracting, but I kind of like them. And then this repository group thing lets me constrain to certain groups of repositories. So for example, all the project repositories, all the project info repositories. I personally would find this more useful if it was grouped by SIG that owned each repo, and I plan on implementing that as a member of the steering committee going forward. But for now, if you have a question about what those repo groupings are, there's a SQL file here that defines, the API machinery repo group consists of these repositories. Notice there's one living in Kubernetes incubator. What are all these bot commands? They're documented via a manually updated table here. It's the go.kates.io bot commands thing that sort of tells you, roughly speaking, in one page what they all are. We also have this new shiny plugins help page. Most of the bot commands are implemented via a program called Prow. And here we can see, for example, the LGTM plugin. If I click this drop-down arrow, I see a description of what the plugin is, who can use it, and some examples of how to use it. I can also do this for, say, the label plugin, which shows how to remove and add various labels. Find my notes here real fast. Okay, some interesting things I have found from this graph personally. If I click on a thing on the table on the right here that unifies, that shows just that command to the graph, another way of doing the same thing with the commands dropdown. CC is the most used bot command. It's used even more than assign. Do people here actually know what CC does? If you don't, it turns out it automatically requests a review from somebody if it's done on a pull request. Doesn't do anything if it's on an issue. But it was something we sort of noticed organically people were using, and it seems like requesting a review from somebody is a good way to use GitHub's model of saying, I want your attention. Let's see here. One of the commands we put in place recently is this idea of hold. It applies a do not merge label to your pull request. You can remove it with /hold cancel. It's something we have been personally using in test infra quite a bit. You can see this if I go to the project infra group. The shape of the graph is roughly the same. We've been using it most often to implement a workflow where the pull request author submits their thing, but then they want to hold it back because they want to be the person to actually merge the pull request, or they want to be the person to actually deploy the pull request. We found it's a really great way to implement sort of a social construct of a workflow instead of having to put all this really crazy automation over it. I've also done things in the past where I hold a PR and then I tell somebody else why I'm holding it. I say, when you want to merge this yourself, please remove the hold. One personal nit I have is we can see the growth of the use of the LGTM command to LGTM PRs. And we can also see, now I'm command clicking instead of just clicking here. I can also see the growth of the approve command. Let me go back to all repo groups. And you can see that it looks like we're really not approving that much compared to what we're LGTMing. This is weird. It turns out that a lot of people who have approval powers can /LGTM, and the bot will know who they are based on their presence in owners files and automatically apply the approved label on their behalf. But DevStats isn't smart enough to collect this knowledge, so it really throws off our approvers and reviewers graphs. The only way we know of collecting unique approvers is whether or not somebody's using a /approve command to get a pull request pushed through. Some other spikes of interest you might have experienced yourself. Use of the priority command to apply a priority label. Guess which of our most recent releases required people to apply the priority critical urgent label in order to get code merged in. The lifecycle label. If you watch any issues at all, you may have noticed this joker called FetaBot. Here, I'll zoom into the past 90 days. Recently applying a lot of lifecycle stale issue labels to issues or pull requests that haven't been touched in over 90 days. It's sort of rate limited, so it's not applying to every single issue and pull request all at once, but we are gradually sweeping through all of the out-of-date pull requests and issues. Coincidentally, usage of the close command has kind of recently gone back up over what it used to be historically. Again, if I zoom back out to sort of the usage over the past year, it's not the highest that it's ever been, but it's kind of on a continually upward sweeping trend. So this to me would be evidence that although some of you might find the bot really kind of annoying in the number of issues that it's pinging, it does seem to be incentivizing some people to actually close issues that they haven't looked at in a very long time. I know I can speak on behalf of SIG testing. I've been going through and triaging all of the issues that have our label or any that notified me. I think that's all that I have time for. Thank you for letting me show you the graph of the week.
Awesome, Aaron. Thank you. That's fantastic. All right. Let's see. After Aaron, we have SIG updates. SIG scalability. Frederick, are you on?
It's actually SIG instrumentation.
Sorry.
But yeah, let me share my screen. Can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, just a quick update from SIG instrumentation. I think it's actually going to be relatively quick. I'm Frederick. I work at Chorus, and I'm basically I work on Prometheus and Kubernetes and basically everything in between. And that's also what one of our updates is about. So as part of SIG instrumentation, we maintain this agent for Kubernetes, which basically converts all Kubernetes objects to metrics. So for example, you have your deployments, and your deployments have a replica in the spec and available replicas in the status. Then kubestate metrics converts all of those to metrics, and then you can alert those, graph those, visualize, etc. And for kubestate metrics in the past cycle or two, we actually did a couple of major releases and actually released version 1.0. So that was huge. And there's a lot of traction on it, so that's great. Yeah, that was one part. And I'm not sure when the last community update was, but we have been developing the core and custom metrics APIs. So these are in order for to define formally defined APIs for metrics in Kubernetes. And the core metrics here are things like that all workloads have. So like CPU, memory, file system, etc. And the custom metrics can really be anything arbitrary. So like queue length, or really anything that your monitoring system can capture. And both of those APIs are now already starting in 1.8, are in beta. So do go ahead and check them out. Bear in mind that all of those APIs are, although they're in beta, only their specification are in. They are aggregated API servers, so their respective implementation may not be in the same state. For example, for the core metrics, there's actually a pretty stable implementation that we refer to as the metrics server, which just collects these metrics from the Kubernetes stats API. And for custom metrics, there needs to be an adapter for whichever monitoring system you use. And as part of SIG instrumentation, something else that one of our members has been working on, Solly Russ from Red Hat, he's been working on a custom metrics API implementation for Prometheus. So Prometheus is an open source monitoring system, if you're not familiar with it, that is super popular for monitoring Kubernetes with it. And that's why it was the natural first choice to implement a custom metrics adapter. And I believe there's also one for a stack driver. I don't think there's any other implementation so far, but do check that out as well. So basically what's cool about this is that now we can auto scale on arbitrary metrics. And this is actually already also implemented in the HPA by SIG auto scaling. This was implemented. I believe actually Solly was working on that as well. So now you can auto scale on any metric that you can imagine that you are collecting with Prometheus. And something else that we're sort of in the middle of doing right now that we've already started doing, but there's still some work left to do. So we're in the process of phasing out Heapster. So there were a couple of architectural problems with Heapster. So the people who had previously maintained Heapster came into SIG instrumentation, and that's essentially why we were developing the core and custom metrics APIs, so that we eventually just have this definition of APIs, and then there can be providers for that. And in that sense, we don't have the limitations that we have today with Heapster anymore. I won't go into detail about that. If you're interested, SIG instrumentation meets every Thursday, 6:30 p.m. European Central Time, if you're interested in discussing that. Other than that, that's it from SIG instrumentation.
Thanks, Frederick. Appreciate that. All right. Let's see. Announcements. Sorry. The idea of reducing release cycles from 4 to 3 a year. Tim, are you here, or do you want me to just mention this?
Just a PSA that there is a thread on Kubernetes dev, and I've been socializing in a number of other SIGs, and it's been kind of inspired by Tim Hawkins' KubeCon talk with regards to how we do releases. And it's just a very simple, modest proposal, which should be discussed in SIG release. And if you are interested, please read that thread, and please come talk to the folks on SIG release, and hopefully we can start to sort out what folks want to do eventually in the long term.
Awesome. All right. If you haven't heard, there's a architecture vulnerability in pretty much every CPU made since like 95. Meltdown, Spectre, it affects Intel, ARM, AMD. There's tons of information about it on the web, a lot of speculation on Twitter, so avoid that. But check with your cloud providers. Most of them have already issued announcements and have mitigated it. So yeah, there's meltdownattack.com if you want to go deep diving into more info. Start there. Office hours is back, 17 January. There's a link in the agenda notes here. Group mentoring cohort number 1 kicked off today.
Yay!
Yeah, that's a Paris thing. Let's see, there's a form here if you're interested. Also, contributor office hours will be renamed coming to the end of the month. Doc will be created in the mentoring docs folder if you're interested.
I'm putting the links in there now.
Okay, thanks. And then KubeCon, Cloud Native Con EU 2018 CFP closes on the 12th, which is T-minus 8 days. So get to it if you're going to talk there. There's a link in the notes to that as well.
Yeah, just want to not only call for papers, but also the early pricing. So if you're going to attend this event, but not as a speaker, So it's the best chance for you to grab the cheapest tickets ever, because the early price ends also on January 12th.
I have a quick question about that, Ihor. If somebody buys tickets and they get their presentation selected, do they get their money back, or how does that work?
I have to clarify that it's actually you're not the first person who asks that. So let me figure it out and probably make the brief update on the next community meeting.
Thanks.
Awesome. All right. Anything else from anybody before we get started with the retrospective part 2? All right. Jace, I believe you're heading up this one. Take it away.
Great, thank you. So this is going to be a different meeting than the community meeting. I highly encourage anybody who's interested in this process to stay, because the release process definitely affects everybody who's here. But if you want to drop off, totally understand. So just really quickly, I'm going to give my spiel. The retrospective is intended to find areas where we can improve over time. And so the focus is really on identifying solutions and not necessarily focusing on the problems per se. So what I'd like to do is make sure that everybody, if you raise a concern or question or something, that it's done in a positive way, that it's done respectfully, and that we work on fixing the process and the technology and the tools, as opposed to pointing fingers at individual people. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and dig into the last section of the retrospective, which is what could have gone better in 1.9, because this is how we help identify things for improvement specifically. And there is a part of the document that if you scroll down, and I will put a link in the chat here so everybody has it, where it says end part 1 and begin part 2 below. And what we'll do is start off with Aaron Krickenberger, who has the first comment there. So
Hi, I'm going to share my screen again so I can point you to the doc I'm talking about. So as we did burn down meetings, which started started 3 times a week, and then we were gradually every day. During the 1.9 release, we had a doc that looked, during the 1.8 release, we had a doc that looked like this, with green, red, yellow statuses and metrics with little indicators that said whether or not they went up and down. This was maintained by humans. I adopted this same pattern for 1.10, for 1.9, assuming that we're all going to do this. But as I'm scrolling down here, you can see that many of the statuses were just sitting there at red, yellow, green. So for somebody sort of going back to try and understand historically what happened during our burn down, there's very little information in this doc that's actually been kept up to date. Our release process has been relatively tribal, and these burn down docs were usually where I went to understand what decisions we made and why we made them. It's unfortunate that I would have to dig through hours of video to do the same thing for this process. So did people find this, were people aware that this doc existed, and then people find this doc useful? Would kind of be my thing. Don't have to answer it now, just a concern that I have that I'm raising. Because it was sort of, unless you were like really living or breathing and participating in every burn down meeting, it was difficult for me to get a zeitgeist of where we were. Let's see. The other thing, I think I'm pretty much just a broken record on this. Every release that we cut with broken tests. I think I made it a point to make sure that when we actually cut releases, look at this, all of the 1.9 tests actually passed when we cut beta 2. But none of the upgrade tests were passing. I'm going to hold myself. I'm going to try doing a live demo right now here and see if the upgrade tests are, oh my goodness, they are actually all kind of passing. Look at that. I mean, they're flaky, right? But, well, all right, I'm not sure that's, hang on. Okay, well, there's some green in there. This is our release signal. I really, it drives me kind of bonkers that we don't actually seemingly pay attention to this. We continue to have historically not blocked releases on these things failing. I really wish that we would. Otherwise, what's the point of using the signal in the first place? A thing I was a little the next thing is on me as well, just blowing through these. Thing I was a little noisy about was the fact that the GKE related tests weren't really getting a lot of attention. So if I look at GKE now, they are in fact pretty green looking compared to what they used to be. So I don't know if this was me poking enough people with sticks inside of the Google org to get some transparency or accountability or visibility into making sure that GKE stuff was passing. Because essentially, if you as a cloud provider want your version of Kubernetes to block the release of Kubernetes, it is on you to make sure you have the staff on hand to actually fix the problems that are blocking Kubernetes. It does look like GKE has heard this signal, which is great. I'm happy to continue the discussion on how we can do this in a more transparent manner. It felt like during the release, a lot of the bugs I filed just kind of magically solved themselves sometimes. Although, to many people's credit, people did actually dig in on some of these issues, and some of them were difficult and hairy, and I really appreciate the effort that went into solving it. It's kind of a question of how we can keep this going on incrementally rather than realizing, oh no, everything's broken again. That's it for my piece of this. Handing off to Josh.
Okay. Summarizing. Sorry, a little distracted. I do work for an operating system company, and we're a little busy today.
Our condolences.
Yeah. So, wait. I actually pulled up the 1.9 retrospective, which is not helping me at all. Wait, where is the 1.10 retrospective?
This is
1.9 is correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it will be in 3 months.
Right. Oh, no, right. We're on 1.9. Sorry. Some things went really well. We added some new automation around handling PRs in 1.9. And that worked really well to eliminate some manual steps in those terms. I'd like to actually complete that automation effectively in 1.10, although there may be technical obstacles to that because some things sound easy to say, but they're not actually easy to implement. Like, for example, we're requiring PRs now to be tagged with some of the same tags that issues are tagged with. And ideally, the bot should take care of that. But actually, the way GitHub is structured, clearly determining which PRs are meant to satisfy issues is actually a hard thing to do. But it was definitely helpful. The one other thing that I would actually and then the other thing that I would say is in almost every case, contributors and SIGs were very responsive to being reminded about stuck issues and issues that were sort of falling behind schedule, et cetera, particularly in the last 3-4 days before release. People really pitched in to make sure that everything got cleared out or removed from the release. And so that went well. In terms of things that could have been improved, number one is over the last 4 releases, we've changed a lot of the tagging rules and labeling rules and the timeline, and added a lot of new bot commands and added a lot of new automation around how issues are handled and the related PRs. And I don't feel that the majority of our contributors are actually up to date on how all of this works now. I certainly had quite a few cases. I would say I spent as much time reminding people of what bot commands they needed to send now as I did reminding them of things that actually needed to be fixed. And the one other sort of missing piece in the automation is being able to assign things to milestones without direct repo control. And the reason why that's a major issue is that we did have a couple of SIGs where the only people with repo rights in the SIG were not available during the 2 weeks before the release. And so this became a major obstacle to getting things wound up, even though the code to fix the issue already existed. The remaining thing is, and this is sort of a major issue for the future, is as we look at farming things out to other repos, whether we go full sort of repo federation or not, we already have a couple things that are in other repos. And for the things in other repos, they do not follow KK standards around issue timing or tagging or reporting at all. As an example, I never had any clear idea of what was going on with kubeadmin issues because they have their own sort of internal standards for how they track those issues for the release. And the issues all got resolved, but I didn't know that that was going to happen because I didn't have any way to figure out the status of them. And so I do really feel that as we push out required components of Kubernetes to other repos, those other repos do need to follow the same standards and be part of the same automation for issues. That's all for me.
Sorry, I was trying to type and also
Yeah.
see at the same time. Thank you, Josh, so much for those. And as we mentioned earlier in the community meeting, you're going to be filling this role again. So hopefully we'll identify these things and target them for fix this time around. And if you're in this meeting still and you're interested in shadowing Josh and learning more about this, please contact myself or even Josh to get lined up for that. Jennifer Rondeau, are you in this meeting now? I don't think she is, but I can speak to this. So basically, we need clear communication around docs and release notes at the SIG level. There was a plan to do this for 1.9 for release notes, and it didn't happen. SIG docs is moving toward representation on more SIGs to help out with this issue. And basically, this is the whole strategy we have around trying to embed facilitation roles in SIGs as opposed to asking SIGs to create those roles internally and have them follow us. And 1.10, I still have my concerns that the release notes process is broken and incredibly difficult to manage. So we're going to put all hands on deck to try and improve that process. So stay tuned on that. The next items that are mine, getting acceptance on process changes is extremely difficult. This was evidenced by my confusion inspiring foray into the KEP and feature process at the Contributor Summit. I walked into the room feeling like most people had at least some idea that KEPs were sort of in progress and that the feature process around those KEPs was intended to make them actionable. And what I did was whack a giant hornet's nest of confusion, and people were like, what is a KEP? What is a process? What is a feature process? Why is this changing? What are you doing? And so I learned that this is pretty hard to do at the scale we're at right now. So this is something that we're seeing with Tim St. Clair's proposal around changing to 3 release cycles per year instead of 4. These big things, we need to figure out how to talk about them as a community and get some sort of consensus in a way that people understand and know how to follow the right process. My last thing here was contributors having to know way too much of the release process in order to interact with it. If I'm a contributor, I really don't want to be focused on administrivia. That's not a good use of my time as a code contributor. I want to write code and have it get reviewed and merged and be part of the project and not necessarily have to know that I need to have the X, Y, and Z labels applied and SIGs need to sponsor this and that. So what we need to do is really have SIGs much more involved in a day-to-day level about shielding code contributors from this process and have SIG leaders and other people who are those leaders, tech leads and SIGs, radiate this information out and handle the adding of items to milestones or adding the right labels and whatnot, instead of having contributors who are not in the Kubernetes or trying to figure this out. So the bot is a great place to start, but we really do need humans telling other humans the right way to do this, because it's the project right now depends on these bot enforced labels to even function. So if they're not in place, we're going to be in real trouble. And if the release cadence does get longer, this is just going to be so much worse. So I'm imploring SIG leaders, if you are contributing features and code and fixes to the code base, please make sure that the people who are doing work under the auspices of the SIG know what they need to do in order to label these properly and get reviews and all that stuff. So that is my request there. Is there anybody else who wants to add anything else that maybe could have been improved before we move on to what we're going to do differently?
Just would like to thank everybody who's been involved into 1.9 release.
Yes, huge thanks.
Maybe just to tie into Tim's 3 releases thing, we could have maybe not done a release that spanned the Thanksgiving holiday, which took out a large chunk of the Pacific time zone people necessary for this, and KubeCon, and the Contributor Summit. Those definitely drained our productivity quite a bit.
I'm not sure that having a code slush 3 days before code freeze was really helpful. A lot of people seemed very confused by it.
Okay, that's not the first feedback that we've gotten about that. There is a code slush in the timeline for 110.
Okay.
With documentation associated with it. It's one of those things that there's not a specific high-level enforcement around it per se. It's more that the release team needs that time to start stabilizing things out. I think we should take a look at that and see if we still need to do that.
Or just make it clear to people what actually happens in code slush.
Right. Okay.
We, to Anthony's credit, we did define code slush in terms of very concrete label-based terms, and we also explained the motivation for it. I think it was just, it's also not the first release we've done code slush. We've done code slush for every release prior that I've participated in, as far as I remember. It was just a compressed timeline. And I think this may have been the first time we used an additional label of priority, critical, urgent, instead of just requiring that pull requests and issues were a part of the milestone that corresponded to the release that we were slushing or freezing for. But all of that automation is documented in the release schedule. Like, all those requirements are documented in the release schedule.
Yes, that is true of 110 as well. And I want to second that. Thank you, Anthony, for codifying a lot of these things, because that was there's been a lot of tribal knowledge around this, and the more we document, the better. So thank you very much for that. Before we move on, is there anything else that we want to cover here? All right. So what will we do differently? Ihor, you have features, processes, and KEPs.
Right, so this item was added a bit before we have figured out what we're going to do with 1.10 in terms of the features. So 1.10 is going to be a really interesting release in terms of the features, because we have two overlapping proposals of how should we handle features in this release. We have the old existing, I don't want to call it legacy, but it's well-known process for almost everybody who has ever had a chance to develop a new feature for Kubernetes. So it's deeply documented in the features repo, in Kubernetes/features repo, and all the features tracking happens there. The second one is the KEP process that has been presented a few months ago and actively discussed during the last few months during Kubernetes Contributor Summit and KubeCon itself and so on. So we have some SIGs, for example, SIG Cluster Lifecycle, who is evaluating the KEP process as the brand new process for handling the features for Kubernetes. At the same time, we have other SIGs, and most of the SIGs are still following the existing features process. So my request here is to codify what we exactly do with the features in this release, and I would follow the classic path of using a features repo for this release as well as we did it before for the previous releases that have happened in the last year. But if we have any people or any groups or any SIGs who would like to try the new process, it should be also codified. And I feel that naturally for the next iterations, we'll figure out the best way for developing features for Kubernetes that satisfy the most people in the Kubernetes community.
Great, thanks, Ihor. And yeah, the second point after that in the retrospective document is basically we just need to find a way to pilot these things. And I think that's probably, when we talk about getting consensus around decisions, this may be the way we do it, is to actually just try things. And instead of trying to tear down the old, we created a new that is so compelling that people gravitate toward it. I think that that's probably going to be the right way to do this moving forward. And Josh, there's a document that talks about the features process, but it never made it past Google Doc form. So I want to get that out as a PR at some point.
Yeah, well, it's just, yeah, I mean, for example, one of the things that you do for issue harassing, et cetera, before code freeze is you look at things that are listed in the features repo and make sure that there's related issues and PRs for those. And so if some of the expected features or all the expected features for release are coming from the CAP process, then I just want to know how to find that.
Yes. There's a big to do there, which I will be trying to chip away at in 110 for sure. And you actually have the next thing, which is document the role of bug wrestler.
And that's in progress. I've got about 2 pages of stuff right now, and I'll be finishing that up so that my new shadows can actually be effective. So
great. Dims, are you on this call? I don't think you are. But his comment about need stronger code ownership and liaisons, that is something that is really front and center right now, as well as we need to increase our density of reviewers because we don't have enough by a long shot. So that's something, I'm not sure what we can do about it per se, but that is, we need to continue moving down that path. Jennifer Rondeau had embedded writing expertise in SIGs for docs and release notes. This again is about that facilitation concept about empowering SIGs to do their best work by taking over some of the administrivia for them. And I think that having doc writers who visit SIG meetings and help construct those release notes and whatnot is going to be incredibly helpful. So hopefully we can do that. DIMS, we should branch early. We pay a lot of cost in blocking master for a long time. That has not unfortunately changed in the schedule as it is. I would love to have a discussion around what it would take to make that happen. So if you're fascinated with that, once the SIG release meetings kick up for this 110 release, which will be scheduled soon, definitely, if you have a passion around that, join those meetings. And if you join the SIG release Google group, you will automatically get invites to those meetings. Lastly, oh man, there's a lot here. Holy cow. So my thing was start everything earlier, which as 110 lead, I have done. I have gotten the schedule and team in place as soon as humanly possible, and hopefully we'll continue that track. Over communicate about status until people are fed up with it. I'm trying to do that right now. And in-person attendance at SIGs wherever possible, just to get connections built between the release team and those delivering code docs. We definitely, SIG release and the release team in general, need to be in SIG meetings as much as possible, because that's really, those human connections are how we get things done right now. And having strong tiebacks between the release process and team and the people delivering the code and tests and documentation is really important. The ones that are retro, we actually came up with in real time. So Nick Chase had to leave, but he said add release note needed and user-facing, non-user-facing tags. I'm not sure exactly what he meant by that. Oh, probably for documentation. So this is interesting. This is really clarifying what kind of docs are needed. So there's release notes obviously is one form of documentation, but there's also usability, user-facing documentation. So that's something we definitely need to talk about how we differentiate those. Because right now, the only place that you can tell something needs user-facing docs is in eHor's feature tracking spreadsheet, which is not a good place to do that. It's not visible. So, Aaron, thoughts on how we could add a
I hope it's
label
good
for
enough, but we have to automate it. So the biggest problem with it that it's not automated, it's manually maintained, and sometimes it's not in sync with the actual state. Because so many people are excited about having the similar form of visualization. So I don't want to say that it's a terribly bad form, but again, the biggest problem is it can be a bit outdated.
I would greatly welcome any and all feedback on how we could better automate the collection of release notes and associating them with pull requests and issues, because a lot of the feedback I have gotten right now when I have suggested that we remove direct write access to the repo from people is that many of them find themselves editing pull request descriptions and titles and release notes blocks and fixes things, all in the name of making better release notes. It seems a little more manual than it ought to be. So I don't have a strong. I kind of want to get evidence on like how many people are doing that, because I feel bad. I'm sorry, that's not fun. But yeah, that's the state we are in today. We do add a release note needed label. We really do. But we don't differentiate user-facing versus non-user-facing. I mean, getting clean and coherent release notes really easily balloons into how do we have a coherent view of what this release is, while simultaneously letting everything evolve from the bottom up. It's a little difficult. So I don't think we'll ever be able to get away from humans and good writers and copy editing and stuff like that. But super open to suggestions on how to make it easier to triage stuff at the start.
Yes, 100%. Josh, you've got a couple here. You mentioned automation completion already, and actually the bot requirements. Those are ones we already covered. Aaron, you've got a few more that you added.
Okay, I guess I got all the rest. Okay, one of the things I proposed, but I am not signing up to do, is that after feature freeze, we have somebody actually write up a blog post titled "A Preview of What We're Working On for 110." Based on all of the feature issues, we should know what all the large, big chunks of work are that each SIG has signed up for. It's not a promise or guarantee that it will land, but it will let people know if they wanted to beta test Kubernetes 110 or even alpha test it, why would they want to do so? What would be coming down the pipeline? What can they plan on in the next couple of months? To me, such a deliverable is the entire point of having a feature freeze. Because unfortunately, the reality of today is code's going to get in however it's going to get in. We can't seem to block that, but we can at least start communicating very early on what we think we're trying to do. So I really hope that I think we've renamed the role from marketing to communications. I hope that the communications person can step up and fill this gap, because I think it would be greatly appreciated. Because I personally, every time I bring up that we cut alphas and we cut betas with failing tests, I think like that doesn't make them really. I know I certainly wouldn't want to try out something that's failing tests from the project that made it. But I also have no idea why I would want to bother doing that. Like I don't know what's coming down the pipeline. So hopefully that solves at least one part of that. As part of as the SIG testing lead, I'll say that we are working on rolling out this thing called Tide to replace Munge GitHub. Tide can be pointed at an entire GitHub organization instead of pointed at individual repos, which means that gradually speaking, every repo in the Kubernetes organization will have the exact same set of automation and tools available to it. It can additionally be configured for individual repositories, but our goal is to have as much consistency as possible across all of the Kubernetes repos. So this means the use of owners files, this means approve and LGTM, this means merges, the Tide UI. I may have linked you to it, and I've discussed this on the Kubernetes dev mailing list. We've now turned it into something where like you can click on the label query on the GitHub query to see exactly what pull requests Tide is looking at to attempt to test and merge. It should provide us a significantly faster velocity and more consistency. So planning on doing this at a bare minimum for all of Kubernetes and all of Kubernetes Incubator. We're going to be improving test grid to hopefully automatically link to, if not create issues for failing tests. So anytime you see a red row on the left-hand side, sometimes right now there's a link called changes that you can click on to take you to a GitHub diff where you can maybe figure out what caused the test to fail. We're also going to do the same thing for issues, because I, as a human being, was having to go create a GitHub issue per failing test and then assign a bunch of labels and stuff and go nag the appropriate SIG to make sure that somebody knew their stuff was broken and that they should go fix it. That's totally something that we can automate. So hopefully we'll get some of the way there with test grid this quarter. As part of the steering committee to help take care of it's unclear who owns what, I'm going to take a best guess at which SIG owns which repo and assign that in a machine consumable way via the sigs.yaml file in the community repo and update some of our tooling to act based on that stuff. Look for proposals on how I'm going to do that coming down the pipeline. And as part of my effort to revoke direct access to Kubernetes, I know that applying a milestone is something that some people in the release team need to do as part of their job for triage. So we'll be adding a /milestone command to Prow to join up with some of those other bot commands I was showing earlier. That's all I got.
Great, thank you so much, Aaron. We are out of time.
Just one note from me. So we're going to, I'd like to sync with Natasha, who is a communication lead for this release, regarding the features blog post, like the pre-features blog post for 1.10. And I'm totally supportive of these ideas. Please add me as, assign this action item to me. So yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Aaron.
Great, thank you so
Sorry,
much.
Chase.
No worries. We are done with this retro. I appreciate everybody's time so much. Thank you and have a great new year. If you're interested in joining the 110 release team, hit me up in Slack, JDuMars, and I will see you all in a week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Team Pumpkin.
Team Elite.
Team Kiwi.
Yeah.